Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Math with Dr. War. Today I'm doing a requested video. Some students wanted me to do the Sample CEAFE exam, so I'm actually going to go through Sample C. One of the things that I noticed with the CEAFE examination is that the way the questions are presented here, I think that's the way you're going to see them on the test when you're in the computer lab. So let's begin. Questions 1, 2, and 3 are your radicals. So I would suggest that you have to really understand radicals. Now the first one, they want us to simplify the radical. You have the square root of 40 and you're adding the square root of 250. We can't add them because the square roots are different. I always start with the smaller one and I have the square root of 40. So I'm going to break 40 into its factors, and I'm going to try to get the perfect square, which would be 4. So 4 times 10 will give me 40. Now I'm taking the square root of 4 and I'm taking the square root of 10. 4 is perfect, so when I take the square root, I get 2 square root 10. 10 isn't perfect. The factors of 10 are 5 and 2. And you can't take the square root of 5 and you can't take the square root of 2. So that stays square root 10. That square root 10 gives me a clue that, okay, 10 times what gives me 250? 10 times 25. So if you take 10 and multiply it by 25, you should get 250. So I'm taking the square root of 25 and I'm taking the square root of 10 because they're multiplying each other. The square root of 25, because it's perfect, is 5. And again, we can't take the square root of 10, so it stays in the radical. Now right here, because the square roots are the same, we're going to add the coefficients. So 2 plus 5 is 7, square root 10. You're thinking of the square roots like if there were like variables. Because if you saw 2x plus 5x, you would tell me the answer is 7x. The same thing here, 7 square root 10. So my answer is D. Here I am multiplying my radicals, and I'm going to do this like the distribution method, like if I was multiplying a monomial by a binomial. So the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is the square root of 4. Always remember, insides multiply insides, plus the square root of 2 times the square root of 7 is the square root of 14, because again, 2 times 7 is 14. And they're in their radicals. 4 is perfect, so when I take the square root of that, I'm going to get 2 plus 14 isn't perfect. If you break 14 in its factors, it's 7 and 2, and you can't take the square root of 7, you can't take the square root of 2, so that's going to stay in the radical sign. So your answer is 2 plus square root 14. So your answer is A. Okay, the last radical, because you're going to have 3 of them, you have the square root of 6 times the square root of 30, and you're dividing by the square root of 5. So I tell my students, okay, let's just multiply 6 times 30. So let's take 6 and multiply it by 30. That's give me 0, and 6 times 3 is 18. So that's 180, and I'm dividing by the square root of 5. Now, what's the sense of having 2 radical signs and you're dividing? Why not have one gigantic radical sign and put everyone in there with the division? So now I'm going to take 180 and divide it by 5. Well, again, you have a calculator, so you could punch this in a calculator. So 5 goes into 18, that would be 3 times, which would give you 15. You subtract, you get 3, bring down to 0. 5 goes into 36 times. So 180 divided by 5 is 36. And we all know 36 is perfect, and the square root of 36 is 6. So your answer is C. And this works all the time. Just multiply straight across. 6 times 30, 180. Put it inside the radical. You're now dividing by the square root of 5. Why have 2 square roots? Just one and put them all in there. and divide them. And notice we got a perfect number. Questions 4 and 5 are your laws of exponents. So here, this is your laws of exponents, which is your product rule, your power rule, your quotient rule, and your negative rule, and your zero rule. So here we're multiplying. So the 3 and the negative 4 will multiply each other. The x squared times the x will multiply each other, and the y times the y to the third will multiply each other. Now these are integers, so we're going to attack them just like integers, and if you had to multiply 3 times negative 4, your answer is negative 12. So A and D is not our answer. Get that out the way. Now this here, because we're multiplying, is the product rule. And the product rule states that if your bases match, you keep your base and you add your exponent. Now right here, you don't see an exponent, there's an invisible 1. And if you add 2 plus 1, that's going to be to the third power. So my answer is B, but we're going to continue. Notice here, this is your y. You don't see an exponent, so that's to a 1. And when you add 1 plus 3, you get y to the 4. So your answer is negative 12, x to the third, y to the fourth. So this one was your product rule. If you need help with your laws of exponents, I did a video with the product rule, power rule, quotient rule, and you should find that in the playlist. Okay, we have the product rule again because you're multiplying, and the rule states that if you multiply, keep the base, and I'm going to add my exponents. Negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4. In algebra, we don't really like negative exponents, so this is where we're going to enforce the negative rule. And the negative rule states that if you have a to the negative m, and you want to write it in the positive, you write the reciprocal, which is 1 over a, and then your exponent now becomes positive. So we're going to apply that rule here. So this would be 1 over x, and then your exponent becomes positive. And who does that look like? B. Here we're subtracting polynomials. So when you're subtracting polynomials, the first thing you do is you keep your first parentheses. So I'm going to keep 7x squared minus 6x plus 2. Your next step is you're going to distribute the negative within the second parentheses. So the negative with the 4x squared becomes negative 4x squared. The negative with the negative 3x becomes a positive 3x. And the negative with the 5 becomes a negative 5. And then you're going to combine like terms. So if this is not, like some students like to combine their like terms horizontally. If you make mistakes that way, I would suggest you do it vertically. So what I do is I put the like terms under each other. So I'm going to move this over here, put a line through it. I'm going to put this here. And then I'm going to put the negative 5 under the 2. And then I'm going to combine them. So remember, when your signs are different, we subtract. So if I subtract, I get 3x squared, and I keep the sign of the larger. So the 7 is larger, so it's positive. So B is not our answer. Again, the signs are different, so we subtract. That gives me 3x, and we keep the sign of the larger. The 6 is the larger, so that's a negative 3x. Okay, A is not our answer. The signs are different, so I subtract again. That gives me 3, and I keep the sign of the larger. The 5 is larger, so that's a negative. Therefore, our answer is C. Here I have another polynomial, and we're multiplying. So I have 4x minus 2 is multiplying x squared minus 5x plus 3. Now I'm going to do this the distribution way. So the 4x is multiplying the x squared minus 5x plus 3. And then the negative 2 is multiplying the same thing, x squared minus 5x plus 3. So always remember that these two parentheses should be identical. And now I'm going to distribute. 4x times x squared is going to be 4x to the third, because 1 plus 2 is 3. Negative, because a positive times a negative is a negative. 4x times 5x is going to give you 20x squared. And then 4x times 3 would give me 12x. Now, I always tell my students, you know you're on the right track because with these problems, you have 3, 2, and then 1. So for these first 3 terms, it should go 3, 2, and then 1. Now, I'm going to distribute the negative 2 into the second one. Negative 2 times x squared is negative 2x squared. Negative 2 times the negative 5x is positive 10x. Be careful with your signs. And negative 2 times positive 3 is negative 6. And now we're going to combine our like terms. The first term and the last term stays. And if you notice, all of them start with 4x to the third and ends with a negative 6. I have to combine this term right here with this term because these are the same. So I have my 4x to the third. Now negative 20x squared with the negative 2x squared will give me negative 22x squared. So let's see, I can exclude B and D. So remember, when the signs are the same, you're going to add and keep the sign of the larger. You can use your calculator. So if you take your calculator and you put it in, so you go negative 20 and then just put minus 2 and hit enter. See, you get the negative 22. You can't put the x in. I think you already know that. So that's how I get the negative 22. And then I'm going to combine the 12x with the 10x. Those are both positive. So that will give you a positive 22x. And let's not forget the minus 6. So notice we got the negative 22 here. And then the next one should be a positive 22. So your answer is A. Question 8, we're still with the polynomials, but you're dividing. This negative 10x have to divide every term in the numerator. So this would be 20x to the 9th divided by negative 10x to the 3rd. I tell students, write it out. Like, you want to pass this test. You don't want to fail it. And I mean, your test is 100 minutes, so there's no harm with writing out anything. You don't want to repeat this class, do you? Just because you didn't write something out. So it says write it out, and then let's just divide each of them. So 20 divided by negative 10 is negative 2. And remember, this again is like the laws of exponents. When your bases match and you're dividing, you keep your base and you subtract. So 9 minus 3 is 6. So your first term should be negative 2x to the 6. Okay, so we can eliminate B and C. When the signs are the same and you're dividing, that would be a positive. 30 divided by 10 is 3. And then again, we subtract. 4 minus 3 is a 1. They're not going to write the 1. We still have A and D in the running. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. Now, when you divide 10 divided by 10, you get a 1. However, here, these cancel. So your answer is D. I always tell my students that when you're dividing and they give you 3 terms in the numerator, your answer should have 3 terms. If they give you 5 terms in the numerator and you're dividing, you should have 5 terms in your answer. So don't be caught with your pants down by choosing A. They gave you 1, 2, 3, so you're like, my answer should have 3 terms. Now we have to come to factoring. So I think the next couple of questions are factoring questions. Here they want us to factor completely. Now, whenever you're factoring, the first thing you should try is GCF. And if you look at your answer choices, you're like, sure bet it's GCF. They have something outside the parentheses. And then let the answers help you. So notice you see a 2. So you're like, okay, what would divide 8 and 18 evenly? That would be 2. Who else do they have in common? They have y. And remember, you take the smallest, so you take y to the first. So you get 2y, and then inside you get 4x squared, because this would cancel, and 8 divided by 2 is 4, minus 9y squared. Because remember, 18 divided by 2 is 9, and 3 minus 1 is 2. Now, once you've done your GCF, check your parentheses. Now, I noticed that 4 is perfect, x squared is perfect, 9 is perfect, y squared is perfect, and you have a subtraction. So whenever you have two terms, each of them perfect, separated by subtraction, this is where you have dots, which is considered the difference of two squares. So you're going to have 2y, you're going to have two parentheses, one is going to have a positive and one is going to have a negative. 4, how would we get 4? That would be 2 times 2. How would you get x squared? X times x. How do you get 9? 3 times 3. And the y squared, y times y. So we're looking for this. So we're looking for a 2x. Okay, so my answer is D. I always tell my students, when it comes to the CEAFE test, you will need to know how to factor, because they're only going to give you one factor. They're not going to give you two, because if they give you both factors, why would you factor? You would simply just FOIL. So they want to know if you can really factor. Now here I noticed that my A is a 5, which is greater than 1. And whenever that happens, this is when I do my AC method. So the 5 is going to go multiply the 6. So you're going to get x squared plus 13x minus 5 times 6 is 30. Then I draw my x. Up here is going to be my product, which is negative 30. Down here would be my sum, which is 13x. And then over here, I would have x and x. Now, the only way you can have a negative product is if you multiply a positive times a negative. Now, I'm looking for two numbers that when I multiply them, I get 30, but when I subtract them, I get 13. Now, to get 30, and I always say, start with the smallest and go down the largest. So I'm like, okay, 1 times 30, because I find that I see students in the test guessing, and they're always missing a factor. So I always start with 1. So 1 times 30 is 30, but if I subtract them, I get 29. So no bueno. Okay, 2 times 15 would give me 30. And when I subtract them, I get 13. Yes, so 2 and 15 are my factors. Now I want a positive 13, therefore the 15 is going to go with the plus and the 2 is going to go with the minus. You must remember that in the beginning we took the 5 and multiplied it by the 6 to get the 30. We have to now take it out. So we're going to go here and divide by 5, and over here divide by 5. Now this 15 divided by 5 will give me 3. So this is actually x plus 3. Well, over here, this is not going to divide evenly. So you see this 5 right here is going to go right here and stick itself onto the x. So that becomes 5x minus 2. Now we're going to be looking for one of these. So let's look, x plus 3. Yep, there it is. So, and this is your AC method, or what I call it in class, slide and divide. So here I slide, and then over here I divided. Here we need to factor this polynomial. Now when you see 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, that's when you're going to use grouping. And grouping is just what it says. So you're going to group the first two, and then you're going to group the second two. Now, after you grouped, you're going to use GCF. 15 and 20, what would divide those evenly? 5. And what else do they have in common? C. So we're going to be dividing by 5C. So that will be 5C. And when we divide, 15 divided by 5 is 3. The C's would cancel and leave you with W minus 20 divided by 5 is 4. The C's cancel and you're left with Z. Okay, over here, now notice that the leading term has a negative. When your leading term has a negative, we need to factor that out. So we're going to take the negative with us. 6 and 8 is divisible by 2, and they both had D in common. So we're factoring out negative 2D. And when we divide, I'm going to get 3W because 2 negatives gives me a positive, and 6 divided by 2 is 3, and the D's cancel. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and the D's cancel, and you have Z. You know you're on the right track when this and this are identical. And what are we going to do? We're going to take this and put it in one parenthesis. So this will be 5C minus 2D. And then we're going to keep one of these. So let's keep the first one, 3W minus 4Z. And we're finished. And let's look to see who has one of these factors. So I have a 5C minus 2D. So that one is not there. 3W minus. Okay, so my answer is C. Y represent a number, which equation is a correct translation of the sentence. So it says 15 is. Now when you see that word is, it means equals. And then it says 28 less than 5 times a number. Now because I see that than, this is first. So the 5 times the number is first. So that will be 5x. And less than means to subtract. And I'm subtracting 28. So who looks like this? Well, they said y. Forgive me. I'm so ingrained with x. But you all know what I'm talking about. So your answer is B. Here we have to solve for x. So we have some fractions. Now I know a lot of people don't like fractions, but we're adding them and it has a variable. So your first step is to find the LCD. I start with my biggest number, 6. Would 2 divide 6? Yep. Would 3 divide 6? Yep. So your LCD is 6. All of these would be 6. Now to make 3 6, I would have to times by 2. So this becomes 4x. To make this 2 6, I would times by 3. So 1 times 3 is 3. And to make this 6 stay 6, I would times by 1. So that's 5. Now once I found the LCD and they're all the same and I created equivalent fractions, I'm going to cross this out. We don't need it anymore because they are equivalent. We're just working with the top portion, which is 4x plus 3 equals to 5. And let's solve for x. I would subtract 3 on both sides. 4x equals to 2. Solving for x, we'll divide both sides by 4. X has a value of 2 over 4. You don't see that here. You have to reduce. And remember, when you divide, you go this way. So 4 can't divide 2. So please don't choose D as your answer. 4 can't divide 2. You would reduce both of these. You can divide by 2. That would give you a half. So your answer is A. And again, you can use a calculator. So if you get the 2 over the 4, just take your calculator and go 2 divided by 4. And notice your answer is 0.5. And you should know that 0.5 is a half. Here we want to solve for x, parentheses. So this will be 3 minus 9x. I'm going to distribute negative 7x. Negative 7 times 5 is negative 35. Please be careful with your signs. Now this is variables on both sides. So I'm going to add 7x to both sides. So this is 3. When the signs are different, you subtract. keep the sign of the larger, so that will be negative 2x equals to negative 35. Solving for x, I need to get rid of that 3, so I'm going to minus 3 on both sides. I get negative 2x equals to negative 38. Solving for x, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. So this will be x equals, and when I divide this, I'm going to get a positive 19.